What's up? This is Forte Catholic Radio. I am your host, Taylor Schroll, and it is a good day today. October 25th holds a special place in my heart for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's my birthday today. Everybody say happy birthday. Thanks, Jake. I heard one person, my producer, and I know all of you just said it driving around in your car out there. It's also a good day today because the Baseball World Series begins today, and we all know that something special is going to happen because the Cubs, who haven't won in a bajillion years, are in the World Series today. That's a lot of fun. And my good buddy, him and I go way back. His last name's James. His first name's LeBron. He is kicking off his season tonight, and they are unveiling the championship banner in Cleveland today. So it's a very, very good day. Excited to be here on the air on my birthday. If you were with us last week, we went live on my wife's birthday. So it's just been a birthday extravaganza around here recently. We got a great show planned for you today. We had a lot of fun with last week's show. It really was a lot of fun. We had we did our first Forte Five segment of all time. We had my friend Connolly Kruger, who's in the Corps of Cadets here at A&M. We just had a lot of fun. And if you missed the show, if you missed that show, if you missed any of our previous shows, you can find the show on iTunes. You can listen to the podcast, subscribe to that. And if you like it, you can rate it, comment on it. It would help kind of boost the publicity of it and kind of get more people to be able to listen. So thank you all for those of you who have been supportive of the show so far. But enough of that. Let's get into today. So the plan for the day is a couple of things. I want to share with you a couple of things that I learned and kind of grew in, was challenged in, and when I went to a conference for work the other day. It was called the Climb Fundraising Conference. So for those of you that don't know, I'm a full-time missionary. I work with Ablaze Ministries here in town. I work in youth ministry, building up youth ministers so that we can forge youth for Christ in the church. And one of the things that we do as missionaries is we fundraise. So we fundraise our salary. So I have a team of people who support me monthly, who have supported me through one-time donations, and that's like how we live, and that money is actually how I'm able to do all of my ministry from youth ministry even to this show. So we went to this Climb fundraising conference so that we can learn how to better fundraise and how we can train our staff on how to fundraise. And there's a couple of things that obviously don't pertain to everybody because 99% of you listening don't fundraise your salary. But I learned a few things about money. I learned a few things about our Christian relationship with money and how we're supposed to be stewards of what God has given us that I want to share with you today. I learned the importance of questions. We'll get into that. I learned the importance of just like taking a retreat, some time away. It was a great time for me to just kind of rejuvenate and kind of get out of my normal day-to-day. And it was also a great time of Christian Brotherhood. There was a group of men there that really got to pour into me. We got to pour into each other, have a lot of fun, and we were growing together in our faith. And that was a really neat thing. So actually, one of those guys that I met is actually going to be on the show today. His name's Matthew. He is in Colorado. He's a fellow missionary, and he's going to call here in about 20 minutes, and we're going to talk about Christian Brotherhood and what that looks like in his life, what it should look like for us. So if you're a girl and you're listening out there, don't worry, it's important for you to know about Christian Brotherhood as well. And there's also, we're all in this together. So we're going to be specifically talking about what it means for how important it is for guys to stick together in our faith, because we all know that there's a tragedy within our church that a lot of men aren't as active as God's calling them to be. So we'll talk about that a little bit, but I just want to first start off with this topic of questions. So it's been something that has continually popped up in my life over the past few weeks, and recognizing that Jesus, the greatest teacher of all time, very rarely answered a question with a straight answer, or he very rarely just stopped and started teaching. The best thing that he did in his teaching was ask questions. He was the master of asking questions. I was looking through doing some research before the show and before a couple of talks that I've been given recently, and Jesus was asked somewhere around 300 questions. He answered 2 of them with a straight answer. Like if I asked Jake in here in this studio, hey, Jake, what do you want for lunch right now? He would probably tell me an exact answer, not ask me another question, But Jesus was always asked questions, and he would ask questions right back. 2 times he gave a direct answer. And most of the time, instead of, just coming out and telling people the answer, he would ask a question. Here's a couple of examples here in the scriptures. In Matthew chapter 5, verse 46, he says, if you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Like, he didn't use the negative, like just start yelling at people like, hey, you should love those who love you. No, he asked a question, because asking that question, oh, what reward will you get? It makes us start to think about, oh, what is that? What does that look like in my life? How am I supposed to live this out? And so I have a list here of 135 questions that Jesus asked in the Gospels. And I'm just going to, for the next 16 minutes, just going to read these questions aloud. So number 1, no, I'm just kidding. I'm definitely not going to do that. So let's talk about the importance of questions and what Jesus asking these questions actually did. The first thing that he kind of employed, he answered questions with questions. So in Mark chapter 8, when his followers asked Jesus how he planned to feed the crowd of 4,000 people, so they come up to him, it's like, hey, Jesus, we've been walking around in this place in the middle of nowhere for days, and there's a lot of people here, and we don't have any food for them, so how are you going to feed them? Which I love that whole scenario, trying to picture that in my mind. And Jesus asked them, responds to the question, how many loaves do you have? And that question kept his followers involved, right? Because we all know how that story ends. We know that story ends with Jesus with Jesus multiplying the loaves and the fishes, and he ends up feeding everybody. Like, he knew what he was going to do, but in order to keep his followers involved, he said, how many loaves do you have? And then, they went and asked, and there was a little boy who had a few fishes and loaves, and they were brought to him. So that story, like, he keeps his followers involved because he wants us to be involved in his work. So, like, in our lives, Jesus could just accomplish whatever he wanted to accomplish, but he wants us to be involved in that. There was a Casting Crowns song a couple of years ago. And one of the lyrics was, how refreshing to know you don't need me, and how amazing to find that you want me. Like, God is the most powerful being in the entire world, right? Like, his will be accomplished somehow, and he wants you to participate in that. And if we do, great. We're participating in this mission that God has given to us. Like, if we don't, like, he doesn't need us. He'll find another way to get his will done, right? So that's the first thing, answering with questions. The second thing that questions do is it gathers data. So by saying how many loaves do you have, like, he finds out what they have and what they can offer. A factual question such as, how many years have you worked in your current job, doesn't require much like personal disclosure, but it reveals insights about the person. So you can learn things about people by asking questions. And one of the things that I picture with this a lot, one of the best times that we ask questions is when we first start dating people. Like, we want to get to know someone, and by asking them questions, we get their answers, and it gives us insight into them. It's like, oh, if you go on a first date, let's say you go on a blind date with somebody, and you ask them the question like, oh, what do you do for a living? And they say something illegal, like, that is an insight that you probably don't want to be dating this person, right? So you're able to gather data by asking questions, where if you just talked the whole time, you wouldn't be able to learn those things about those people. Another thing that Jesus uses questions for is making statements. It's like, okay, Taylor, you're going crazy. What are you talking about? So Jesus is able to ask questions to communicate powerful things without being rude or coming off as like combative. And he says, for instance, he says, why does this generation seek a sign? And that comes across a lot better than, you stubborn group of unbelieving people. Like, why are you asking me these questions? He says, no, like, why does this generation seek for a sign? And again, instead of being yelled at by Jesus, I know if you're yelled at or if I'm yelled at, I begin to back off and be like, oh man, like, I don't want to listen to this guy. But if he asks a question, why does this generation seek for a sign? I'm able to ask myself, if I hear that, oh, like, why am I seeking a sign? Why can't I, believe and have faith in these sorts of things? Another way that we can ask questions is, or another reason that Jesus asked questions is to communicate his passion. So in Mark chapter 8, Jesus asked his followers, why are you talking about having no bread? Do you still not see or understand? Are your hearts hardened? Do you have eyes and fail to see and ears but fails to hear? So like Jesus is asking these questions, and he's able to communicate how passionate he is about what's going on. I think about this all the time. It's like whenever you get in an argument, you're getting passionate about something, I tend to ask questions. What are you talking about? What are you doing? And a lot of times that's communicating passion. You're also kind of making a statement about what you really feel, but you're asking questions. And then one of my favorite questions of all time that Jesus asks is actually whenever he has just done this great miracle of feeding the multitudes, right? So there's actually in one of the gospels he actually does this twice. He feeds 4,000 and then he feeds 5,000. And in the first story, they have extra food, right? And they go and they collect 7 wicker baskets full of 12 wicker baskets full of fish and loaves. And that happens in a Jewish area. And then when it happens again, and it happens in a Gentile area, like a non-Jewish area, they go and they collect all the leftovers, and it's 7. There's 7 baskets left over. And so I was reading this when I was in college, and that second story ends with the question, do you not understand? And then the chapter ends and it goes on to another story. So I'm sitting there reading it in the church, and I have no idea what's happening. So I go into the campus pastor, and I'm like, Jesus asked this question of his disciples, do you not understand what has just happened? And I'm like, no, I don't understand what has just happened. So because Jesus asked this question, I go and I seek the answer. What this pastor tells me is really neat, that in the Jewish area, they collected 12 extra baskets full. And that symbolized that Jesus had come for the 12 tribes of Israel. Like he had come for the people of God. The Israelites had been the people of God throughout the entire Old Testament. And Jesus was coming and to fulfill all of the promises that he gave to his people. And then the second story, there are 7 left over. And 7 is the number of completion. So if there's the perfect number of 3 in heaven, so that's the Trinity, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, that's the perfect number in heaven. And the perfect number on the earth is 4. So, the 4 corners of the earth, or the 4 horsemen. There's a lot of this symbolism in the scriptures about the number 4 and that being the perfect number of earth. Well, if you put 4 and 3 together, what do? You have 7, right? So that was the perfect number. So it was what Jesus was saying is like, I've come for the Jews. I've come for the people of God in the Old Testament, but I've also come for everybody else. And so when he asked that question, do you not understand? He was asking his disciples. He was asking me, the reader, and I didn't get it. But because there was that question, I went and I got an answer, and I learned something very, very neat. Another thing that Jesus did by asking questions is he was seeking feedback. So he was healing a man of his blindness, and as he was healing him, he asked, "Do you see anything?" And we can ask the same kind of question, and a question such as, "Do you understand what's going on?" Because there was a process of healing that Jesus was doing. Like, do you see anything? And it was this, so he was blind, and then Jesus started the healing process, and he could see kind of like figures. And then Jesus asked, do you see anything? And he told him, yeah, I see kind of like, it kind of looks like tall, just like images. And then Jesus healed him, like fully healed him. Then he could see everything. So Jesus was able to get feedback in that. And then he also uses probably the biggest question, one of the biggest questions that everybody remembers from the Gospels, is he uses these questions for personal application. So towards the conclusion of the Gospel, Jesus asks a general question of his apostles. He says, who do people say that I am? And they start by giving him information, like he's gathering data, gathering facts, like we talked about earlier. And then, they start saying, oh, you're John the Baptist or you're Elijah. And then he flips the question. He says, who do you say that I am? So he takes this question. It's like, oh, this is what other people are saying. Now it becomes a personal thing. Who am I to you, right? And who do you say that I am? Who am I to you? That's the biggest question that Jesus asked in the scriptures, the biggest question that he's asking you and me today. Who do you say, driving in your car, listen to this on the podcast, who do you say that Jesus is? So just like to kind of look at this, it's like, okay, why do we talk about this at all? And I think it's the importance of us walking through these questions. And when we're reading the scriptures, when we're in mass and we're hearing these scriptures, why is Jesus asking these questions and stopping and trying to answer those questions, right? But then also the importance of us like asking questions, asking questions of to do all of these things, asking questions to gather data. So like to grow, like so that we're not so prideful. We know that we need to grow. We know that we need to learn. The best way to learn is to ask a question. A lot of times people are sitting there in a place in their faith where they don't know how to move forward. They have questions. They have doubts about the faith. And a lot of people kind of get hung up on these doubts, and those doubts tend to make them start drifting away from their faith, drifting away from the church. When in all actuality, a lot of those doubts and a lot of those questions are good things, because if we use them correctly and we seek out answers to those questions, we can then get answers, and we can grow in our faith. We can grow in our knowledge of the faith. We can grow in our love for God. And there's just also a great just a reminder from Jesus and the importance that he put on questions is like, how many questions do we ask of the people around us? When's the last time you asked your wife or your husband or your kids or your coworkers, like ask them a question and actually wanted the answer. So we'll continue our conversation on questions a little later in the evening. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we will be back with my good friend, Matthew Bachali. We are going to call him right now and get him on the line. We're going to be talking about Christian Brotherhood and the great experience we had at the Climb fundraising conference. Also, in the third segment, we're going to be on Facebook Live. So if you want to join us there, that's going to be a lot of fun. If you have any questions for me, I'll be answering them in the third segment. You can also call us at 855-683-7332. We'll be right back. All right, we're back. This is Forte Catholic. I'm Taylor Schroll. You're listening to our fourth live episode and the first ever episode on my birthday. It's been a good day today. So in our first segment, we were talking. I mentioned that I went to the Climb fundraising conference a couple of weeks ago, and I met my friend Matthew Jolly Bachali, is how he told me how to remember how to say his name. What's up, Matthew?
Hey, how you doing, Taylor?
I'm doing great. So, Matthew, we met, what was it, a week and a half ago or so?
Yeah, about 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, so we were at the Climb fundraising conference. So what were you doing there?
So I was there because I work with a ministry that serves the U.S. military. It's called Cadence International. And I went with my director of mobilization, who's the guy who's in charge of helping all of our missionaries around the world raise their support. So we were there because we're trying to get better and better at helping our missionaries be fully funded and get out there and feel really healthy about what they're doing.
Yeah, that's great. And we were there for obviously for the same reason. I myself still need to get fully funded. I'm almost there, and we're working on getting our staff there as well. So what does Cadence International do?
So Cadence has been around for over 65 years and actually was started by some World War II veterans who not only survived the World War II, but they fell in love with the Lord while they were in the military. And they were overseas, and they were under a great amount of pressure. So one of them in particular came back, and he said, I need to start a ministry that just focuses on the U.S. military. And sure enough, he did that. He grabbed up 3 other young men who served with him. and they started Cadence International. It used to be called Overseas Christian Servicemen Centers, OCSC, but that was a mouthful, so we changed our name in about 1994 to Cadence International.
I know that feeling, man. My ministry just did the same thing. We used to be Collaborative Catholic Formation Ministries, and that was very descriptive of what we were, but it didn't really roll off the tongue, so we rebranded
Yeah, and what
as well.
is it now?
Ablaze Ministries. a lot
Ablaze
better.
and Cadence. It rolls off the tongue. I like it.
Yeah, there you go. So what do you guys do? Like how do y'all do your ministry with the military?
Well, we have 250 staff, and most of us are pastors, and we raise our support, and then Cadence sends us somewhere near a military installation around the world. So we open our homes. We call it Hospitality House Ministry. And we open our homes and we invite the service members and their families into our homes. We make home-cooked meals. We do Bible studies. We have worship nights. We go on outings. And then, what we really become is just very close friends to these service members and their families. And over time, they open up to us. We get to truly share the gospel, talk about the Lord. We get to help them in counseling situations. Any kind of ministry you can imagine, we're out there doing it. And we come alongside the military chaplains because they're not, fully staffed in all of these bases, and they need a lot of help. So we get to come alongside the chaplains. And it's an ecumenical movement. We work with Catholics and Protestants, and we're just in there kind of low to the ground and serving where we can.
That's great. Yeah, you mentioned, working with Catholics and Protestants. One of the coolest things about this Climb fundraiser, for me at least, was the brotherhood that we had, and with all of us there. We had a few Catholic groups there, a few non-denominational groups, and just kind of across denominations. And we had a great time, as a whole group, with everybody that was there, but especially with our cabin. Our cabin was a trip, man. We had a lot of fun. we were definitely the best cabin for sure. So, there was one night especially where me and my boss walked in after the evening was over, and you guys were sitting there just kind of hanging out, and we came and hang out with you. What was it, like two and a half hours or so that we were out there hanging out?
Yeah, I think by 11:30, some of us finally said, hey, maybe we should get to bed, because the next day we had another full slate of workshops and keynote speakers. And yeah, it wasn't, in that sense it wasn't good, but in every other sense it was just awesome. I and you said it, there were 4 rooms, 4 different ministries. There was a campus ministry from Kansas, you guys from Texas, we were from Colorado. And yeah, we all sat around on these couches, and we just laughed and shared our hearts. And I think that's where you kind of found out my heartbeat. This is what I love to do. I love hanging out with other men, iron sharpening iron, like the scriptures say, and just really get into each other's lives. That's what we did.
Yeah, so I've heard that before, the iron sharpening iron. What does that mean to you when you hear that?
Well, first thing I got to say is I've been I'm fairly old. I'm in my late 40s now.
What an old man!
I've been in ministry for 24 years, and early on I realized I just can't do it alone. I can't do life alone. I can't do ministry alone. I need guys, and my wife is awesome. We've been married 24 years. She's my best friend, but she doesn't give me everything that I need when it comes to having real, honest and vulnerable relationship like I can with a couple of brothers. And that's what I've been seeking out for the last 20 plus years. And it's just done nothing but serve my life well and just make me fuller and richer for it.
Yeah. So why is Christian brotherhood so important to you? Why is this such a big deal for you? Why is it, on your heart all the time?
Well, I think a couple of things. One is I think the Bible's pretty clear that we need each other. It's just a theme that you see in the life of Christ and in his disciples. And you think about that. What if you could have been one of the guys walking with Jesus? And what kind of relationships would they have had with one another? They would have known everything about each other. And so that's kind of the core, the basis for me. And then I'm just a real pragmatist. I love the idea of getting together, like in the morning for coffee or breakfast. In fact, this morning I had breakfast with one guy at 6 a.m. Tomorrow morning I'm having coffee with another guy at 7 a.m. At noon today, a good buddy of mine, a friend from college and just a dear brother, called from from out of state, from Mississippi, and he said, "Hey, I'm struggling in my marriage. Can we talk?" So I spent 30 minutes today at lunch just on the phone with a guy, just walking him through what he's going to do while he's struggling. There's always opportunity to help another guy and to be helped when you're down or low, and that's why I believe in it.
Man, that's awesome. So, what has been the best experience that you've had with another group of men, kind of in this Christian Brotherhood?
Well, I'd have to say probably right now I'm having such a great time in life because there's a core group of guys in my life, and they're not all in Denver where I live. They're actually spread out, like this friend of mine from Mississippi, and I have other friends that are around the country. But I think what I love is that I can get on the phone or I can get on the internet and I can connect with these guys. And anytime we're together in the same city, we're together. And right now, what I have is just kind of this feast of relationship that I've been devouring. That is with mature guys who really care about me and they ask good questions. So honestly, you're asking me in the perfect time in life. I've had lower times where I didn't have those relationships, but right now I feel like I'm just one of the most blessed guys on earth.
That's awesome, man. There's been so many influential guys in my life, and I know that I was mentioning earlier that there's this a lot of times in our churches, we see a lot of women who are very faithful and very active in their faith. And at least for me growing up, it's the scale of women who are acting in their faith, and men, it's really scaled more towards the women. So when I finally did get a few men in my life, I really did start growing in my faith. So you mentioned that there have been times that haven't been so good for you. What things go wrong when you're not in Christian Brotherhood?
Well, here's the circumstances, at least it's been for me. I have gotten really busy with work and ministry, and when it kind of overtakes my margin in my life, the edges of your day where you could be doing some really cool stuff with your family, or you're taking care of your health, or you're hanging out with some guys. And I've always said you got to kind of work the edges of your day. So early morning, great time to get together with a guy and have coffee, or late in the evening, the kids are down, they're already in bed, and you go and you hang out and watch a good ball game or something, but go be with a friend. And when I have been too busy with work and ministry, because they're one and the same for me, work and ministry is all blended together, I get overwhelmed, I lose my margin, and then I just don't have time. And what ends up happening is I don't have these guys in my life asking hard questions, the very questions they need to ask so that I can get out of this rut that I'm in. And that has been probably 2 or 3 major seasons in my life over the last 24 years where I just felt so bone dry because I didn't have those guys in my life.
Yeah, wow. And
let me tell you, one time I was at that place where I finally had just a dear friend. His name's Kelly, and he came to me and he said, "I need you to read this book." And he handed it to me, and sure enough, the book's called Margins. And he said, I'm not trying to come down on you. I just see it. You are so stressed and you need time. And by the way, you and I haven't hung out for weeks. And he handed me the book and walked off. And I read the book, and it was a real turnaround moment for me. That was about 13 years ago.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I think that moment that you had with him is kind of the moment I'm having with you right now. You're challenging me on all kinds of these things, right? I know I need to protect the margin.
That's great, man. This is what we do, right? When men hang out together, they share things that really count, and they share things that God cares about. And when you don't do that, when don't get me wrong, I love sports. I love talking about anything going on in that arena. But if we don't get down and dirty and get into the subject matter of our lives that really counts and matters, then I think it's just on the surface, and we're never really going to be sharpened the way God wants us to be.
Yeah, man. It's been great. I just met you a week and a half ago, and I already feel like you've built me up in my faith, and it was a lot of fun hanging out with you. What was the name of the comedian we watched that night?
Tim Hawkins.
Tim Hawkins.
This is a plug for Tim Hawkins. If you have not looked him up, get on YouTube and watch his stuff. He's been around for, 10, 15 years, and I've loved him the whole time. And this guy makes anybody laugh at any age, but especially when guys are together, Tim Hawkins just makes you roll.
Yeah, we were rolling, man. All 6-7 of us sitting out there. We had, one dude that had been a, all American and in college, played the NBA, and he's 17,000 feet tall and just rolling around on the couch, and like we can't talk.
He took up the whole couch. He was so good.
Yeah, it's great. And I think my abs were sore the next day from laughing so hard.
Yeah, and that's all part of it, right? I mean, it's about having a lot of fun. When guys say, "Oh, that's kind of just for girls or something," which I don't understand where that would come from. But when the guys are like, "Oh no, I'm too, I don't know, good for this, or too male for this, too masculine, too macho," I think, man, there's nothing better and there's nothing more male and masculine than getting together with a bunch of guys and laughing your heads off, and then allowing that to roll into some stuff that matters, that can go deep.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I, so I was there with my boss Matt, and we were. We got some male bonding time, together in the group, but also throughout that week. And him and I were talking just like how awesome that time was for us, because like, I'm new here in town in Bryan College Station, where I just moved a year ago, and there aren't many men here that I have that relationship with. Like Matt's like my best friend here. We've shared before that we don't have too many men in our life locally that are kind of building us up. And we've actually been seeking that out over the past couple weeks, couple of months, and it's starting to happen. And it was just kind of cool to have that experience, and like this kind of mountaintop experiences on this retreat at this conference, just to kind of hang out with you guys and kind of see what it feels like when men get together, when there are holy men striving for the same things, passionate about the same things. It was just a lot of fun.
Yeah, and it's good because those mountaintop experiences kind of help us ride on to the next ordinary day. And then we're seeking something that we just didn't think we even needed the day before, and that's why I like the mountaintops. I actually ran a camp out here in Colorado for 6 years, and one of my best weeks or weekends of the year is when we would have 100 to 150 men show up from one church. And you can imagine what those guys are like when they're away from their wives for a weekend, and the amount of stuff, just the joy and the laughter, and then also all the craziness, the stuff that we were doing up in the mountains with these guys. But the worship at night, oh my gosh. And the Climb Conference was about 75, maybe 85% men. When we're singing and worshiping to the Lord, that booming sound, the collective voice of men singing and praising God together, there's nothing better.
Yeah, that was so powerful for me. I lead worship, and so often, like, I feel like I'm the only person singing in the whole church, man. And like that part was so uplifting for me too, to see these men like from 20s all the way up to old men like you in their 40s, and then all the way up to like old men, like people in their 70s and 80s, and like, man, it was just so cool to see everybody like worshiping together. Yeah, and like just like you said, that booming voice, like I imagined at one point during worship, like in like the Battle of Jericho, the walls came tumbling down because everybody's yelling and praising and singing. Like that's what I felt like there. So speaking of mountaintop experiences, right? So like you and I went on this mountaintop experience this time where, we got to learn a lot, and there's a lot of sessions, but it was a time to kind of get away and renew a little bit. But that's what, the Peter, James, and John experienced it up on the mountain with the Transfiguration when, they had that mountaintop experience, and they're like, Peter's like, I want to build tents, I want to live here forever.
Yeah, exactly.
But Jesus is like, no, like we have to go back down the mountain. Like you and I had to go back down the mountain. You actually went to the mountains in Denver. I went to flat Texas, but like we had to come down from that mountaintop experience to come back into our normal lives, to come back into our ministry. So, like, what do y'all do, like, with Cadence International? What do y'all do specifically for the men in your ministry?
Well, so for men's ministry, which that the U.S. military is still roughly 80-20, about 80% are still men. And, I come in, like you said, I'm an older guy, 47, almost 48-year-old guy. When I walk into a military community, I'm like the age of the colonels and the one-star generals. They're young and they're vulnerable, and they need older men in their lives. So we're recruiting singles and couples to raise up their support, go in as missionaries onto the field, and move into community with the U.S. military. And when they do, it's like magnetic. People flock to our houses, and these guys, like myself as a pastor, we open our doors and we open our hearts and lives, and young men and women come in. And for me, I was discipling when I was in Yokosuka, Japan, working with the U.S. Navy. These sailors would come in and they would sit down, in these circles, if you will, and we would open up our Bibles together and just start studying together. And you can't believe what kind of refreshment that is to guys who spend their days on the ships. And when they're underway, when they're out on the open water, they'll work 6.5 days a week. They'll work 18-hour shifts, and they'll stand watch for 24 hours at a time with very little breaks except to go to the bathroom and maybe to grab a quick bite. So low-hanging fruit, man. They come into our house and enjoy the home-cooked meal, but then we just invite them into a place where we say, how are you doing? Tell me how you really are doing, because you've got to be lonely out on those ships. You've got to feel vulnerable when you pull into these ports all over the world. You've got to feel scared. You got to be afraid about what's going on, because this is an unsafe world and you're trying to protect us.
Yeah.
And you know what? It just uncorks them.
Yeah,
they
dude,
can't
I'm
wait
glad
to talk about their lives, and they can't wait to talk about what God could do in their life.
Dude, I'm glad y'all are there for them. We got to go, man. Where can we find Cadence International on the web?
Real easy, cadence.org. Look it up.
Yeah, man. I thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for the ministry that you're doing. And if you're out there listening and you want to support ministry to the military, go out and support Cadence International. Matthew, thanks for being on, man. I really appreciate it. Bye.
Yeah, likewise. Take care, brother.
All right, we are back. Back for segment 3 of Forte Catholic here on my birthday. We're having a lot of fun today. I am live on Facebook right now. If you want to join me on Facebook. What we're doing is we've been talking about the importance of questions today. So I wanted to try out for the first time on our 4th episode, asking my listeners, asking you guys some questions. So if you want to join in on Facebook Live, ask me a question in the comments, and I will answer it on the air. Also, if you want to call in, our number is 85-LOVE-RED-C. That's 855-683-7332, and I will answer your question live on the air. Also, if you want to tweet your question at me, I am on Twitter at Taylor Schroll, TaylorSchroll. So I'll just get started with a couple of questions that I already got earlier today. I kind of sent this out right before the show, asking if anybody had any questions. My friend Brian Lennox, who works over in the Archdiocese of Galveston, Houston, I talked to him earlier today, and he shot me a question on Twitter just now saying, "Happy birthday." He said, "Who is your favorite saint, and or which saint would you have loved to hang out with on a regular basis, and why?" So I'm going to kind of cheat and answer both questions with separate saints. So my favorite saint of all time, and the saint that I chose for my confirmation, is Saint Christopher. So Saint Christopher, there's this legend about him that he helped people cross there was this big river, and he helped people cross it. There wasn't a bridge. It was way back in the olden days. And so he was this big, strong man that was really tall, and he would help people cross the river by putting them on their shoulders and kind of carrying them and their things across. So as the legend goes is that, there's a small little child that came up to him on the river and was like, "Hey, can you carry me across?" And St. Christopher was like, "Okay, I will." So he carries him across, and he starts walking with this little baby on his shoulders. And St. Christopher starts to sink into the water. This big, strong man who's carried, fully grown human beings across this river, and he starts crippling at the weight of this young little baby. And as the legend has it, that child was the child Jesus, right? And Jesus had the weight of the world on his shoulders on the cross and throughout his life. And that St. Christopher was feeling that weight on him, right? And kind of what it says for us is like, we can't carry the weight of the world on the shoulders. We can't even carry the weight of our own sin, but Jesus did that for us. And so that just kind of taught me a couple of things. Like the weight of our sin is crushing. Like it's a big deal that we can't do on our own, and Jesus came and held it for us. But then also that like he's there to help us to be strong, to give us strength, to help us to do the things that we want to do. And then the second question, so like that's who I'd want to hang out with on a regular basis. My other favorite saint, who's hard to hang out with on a regular basis, is Saint Michael, because he actually never lived on this earth. He was an archangel, and he's the prince of all the angels, and he's the one that in the scriptures he cast Satan out of heaven into hell for his rebellion. So like he's the he's the prince of spiritual warfare, right? We had a show a couple weeks ago about spiritual warfare. I mentioned Saint Michael a little bit and prayed a prayer that is written for him. So I love Saint Michael a lot. He's gotten me through a lot of things, a lot of spiritual warfare stuff. So another question I got that I'm not quite sure how to answer, I guess because I'm not a big news junkie. Somebody asked me, what's your what's been going on in the news with cremation? You know anything about going on in the news on cremation?
Not at all.
No, not at all. So, sorry, Michael. We have no idea. That was my friend Michael Fagan. We've been friends for a very, very long time. Grew up together on the same street. So, sorry, I can't ask or answer your question. So, I see there's some people here on Facebook Live. If you want to ask me a question, I'm answering all kinds of questions here on my birthday. Because like on your birthday, you start questioning a lot of things. Like, oh, what have I accomplished in my 27 years, or what was my best birthday? Jake, did you have a favorite birthday?
That's a hard question. I wouldn't say that I particularly had a favorite birthday, but I think my most memorable birthday would have been my 9th birthday, where I received my first guitar.
Nice.
Because I've been playing guitar, I guess, now for 12 years since I got my first one when I was 9.
I gotcha. Yeah. So I was trying to think earlier about all the birthday parties that I had as a kid, and they were just I remember like parties. I think I cried one time when people sang me happy birthday. But so if you have all that aside, if you have any other questions and want to shoot them to me, give us a call here, 85 Love Red Sea. Comment your question here on Facebook Live, or tweet at me at Taylor Schroll, SCHROLL. I think I just got another question here on Twitter, actually from Red Sea Radio. I'm in the Red Sea Radio studios right now, and somebody is tweeting at me. Says, what does St. Paul mean when he says that grace abounds when sin increases? He says it seems counterintuitive, right? So this is the scripture where St. Paul's talking. St. Paul says, where sin increases, grace abounds all the more, right? So it's one of these things where like God's mercy is inexhaustible, right? So we can't do anything that'll take us away from God's mercy, from God's love. There's that passage that says, what can separate us from from the love of God? Not death or life or angels or principalities or any of these things. Like, so this definition of sin is like anything that like puts a separation between us and God, but like God never stops loving us, right? In college, I was asked, does God love Satan? And I was in this grad school class, and we all kind of wrestled with that question for quite a while. Like, does God love Satan? And like by definition, God is love. God loves Satan, right? Like, but Satan did things that, there are consequences for that. So like in my life, like another thing that has been kind of a theme for me this past year is that that our power God's power is made perfect in our weakness, right? So when we're weak and we sin, like the more that we sin, the more grace and the more mercy that God is going to offer us. So like there's no time that we're ever too far gone from God. Like there's no like sin that we have committed that we can never come and confess and be forgiven by him and like continue to be loved by him, right? So another good question there. So we've been talking about questions today, and there's one thing that I learned at the Climb Conference a few weeks ago that I wanted to share with you, because we've used this. A big part of youth ministry is small groups. So people are in are in small groups a lot, like at a youth night, somebody give a talk and then they'll go into small groups and talk about that. Kind of the importance of that is like, God reveals things and he wants us to respond. So we give these young people a chance to respond in their own words, talking about how it applies to their life in small group by asking them questions, but then also, giving them a chance to respond in prayer. But I went and talked to some parents the other day about what I learned at the Climb Conference about asking questions, some of the things that I talked about in the first segment tonight. And it was this way to ask questions that works in youth ministry. It works in parenting. It works with friendships. It works with work or whatever. So I just wanted to share this with you. Because we talked about the importance of questions, but I wanted to give you something practical on like how to use this to accomplish whatever objective you're trying to do. So I was talking with this group of parents and youth ministers, and obviously what they're trying to do is get their kids, either their actual children or the kids in their youth group, closer to God. So there were three ways that are like kind of three steps to this. There's a discovery question, an understanding question, and an application question. So the discovery question asks what? So it's this open-ended question that introduces a new topic seeking to gather facts. So like what you could do with your kids is like, find a Bible verse and look at that Bible verse. Maybe it's the reading of the day. Maybe it's, I know that like I get in my email, like a daily verse a day, like walk through that scripture by yourself, look through it and like kind of prepare your questions. So you'd ask a discovery question, like, so it asks what? So like, what is Jesus teaching in this passage? And then you just ask them and wait for their response. Then the next question is the understanding question, is the why. It's like, why would Jesus say this in the Gospels? Why would Jesus say it this way? Why would Jesus answer with a question instead of giving the answer? Or why would he say this to this particular group of people? And then finally, the application asks how. Like, how does this text apply to your life? So if we just look at like John 3:16, right? So if you read John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only son, that whoever believes in him might not perish, but might have eternal life. So a question you could ask is, what is the point that God is trying to get across to you in this story? And you have a conversation about that. And then after that conversation's kind of over, you'd say, okay, maybe your next question, you're asking the understanding question, the why questions, like, why would God say, why would God give his only son, right? And then you could get your child or your youth group or whoever talking about that. And then the final question is like, in your life, how will you this week apply this verse to your life? And then like you go from there. And I actually have used this method. All I did, so because a lot of times when we're teaching in a classroom or we're teaching at youth nights or we're trying to teach our kids something, we want to we prepare by preparing our argument, getting what we want to say done. When we looked earlier, like it's not really the model that Jesus used. Jesus asked questions. So instead of like preparing all these things that we want to teach someone, we know the objective. Like, so the objective of teaching is like you want this point to come across, right? So, and if you can still get that objective by asking questions. So maybe our objective for going through that passage is like the objective is that we want the person that we're teaching to know that God loves them so much that he gave his only son for them, right? And then you ask questions crafted to get that objective accomplished. And this was just like huge for me because I think so often, you and me, we all just want to talk and talk and talk. Like I've proven that. I have a radio show where I talk to myself for an hour, right? But we need to be asking questions in our faith, asking questions of our spouse, asking questions of our kids, asking questions of our friends. Like, no, asking how are you doing today and really mean how are you doing today, right? And like actually getting to know that, right? So That was kind of that. And then the last thing that I want to do today is I want to do a Forte Five. So last week we introduced our Forte Five segment. So it's our segment where I do a little countdown. The last thing that I wanted to mention on today's show was just what I learned about money and stewardship at this conference. So we are going to start our Forte Five right now. All right. So this is our Forte Five of the top 5 scriptures about stewardship and about our relationship with money. Number 1, Romans chapter 12, verse 1. It is part of submitting ourselves to the Lord. This is teaching on lordship, like why this is important. Like we learn from stewardship that lordship is important. Look up Romans chapter 12, verse 1. In Romans chapter 8, verse 12 through 14, we learn that through stewardship that we're putting to death the needs of the body. So because we're being stewards, we're saying that God's purposes are more important than my purposes. Another thing that we get out of stewardship, what we learn from the scriptures, is that we are to glorify God. In 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 31, we're supposed to give all the glory to God. So that's with everything that we do, our minds, our bodies, our souls, our spirit, and also our pocketbook. In Matthew chapter 6, verse 25 through 35, we know that there's security in God alone. He says, seek first the kingdom of God, and all things will be added unto you. So our security, all our money, everything that we need comes from God. We receive it from God, and it's really His. Next is we need to be entrusted with true riches. So like our riches that we're trying to store up aren't our portfolios, our 401ks, all these things we're stocking up here, but we want a treasure in heaven. And then finally, our last one, I think we did 6 actually, I might have cheated, but Philippians chapter 4 verse 11. And in this we learn to be content in all situations, whether rich or poor or whatever. It's all God. So that is our Forte 5, maybe our Forte 6. I'm not sure. We can count when we're listening back on the podcast. So that is the Forte 5. So today's been a fun show. I want to thank you guys who were listening to the show live on Red Sea Radio. I want to thank you guys who were hanging out on Facebook Live here. This has been a fun show. We will be back next week from 7 to 8 on Tuesday night. This show will be on a podcast on iTunes. I want to take this opportunity to thank everybody who's given me some birthday wishes today. This has been fun. Jake, you had fun today?
I sure did. And happy birthday, Taylor.
Thanks, Jake. I appreciate that. Jake and I went and got coffee today. Kind of for work, but it was really to celebrate my birthday. So just to kind of recap what we did today, we talked about the importance of questions, importance of asking questions, like when you have questions and doubts in your faith, to like seek answers to those, right? Because they can be detrimental if we just let those questions stay, but they can lead us closer to God if we use those questions to actually seek and find answers. My challenge for you this week is to ask real questions of someone that you love in your life. Ask real questions of your spouse, of your kids, of people at your church. Ask real questions, and I'll be back right here next week. Podcast will be out tomorrow on iTunes, so subscribe to that. We will see ya in 7 days. See ya.